Silicon Valley was born out of the defense industrial base.
Of course.
And so this is sort of a proposal to return to that type of a relationship that is much more, cohabitative, I guess you could say. I wouldn't want to say collaborative because it's not exactly that. But yeah, so it had to do with Second World War and defense production around weapons systems, research, a lot of stuff that was happening at Stanford. And then, early compute, nuclear program, et cetera. Like go down any number of those rabbit holes. But essentially, there were a bunch of locations where a bunch of cutting edge research was happening and then execution. And so Silicon Valley was one of them. And there's a great history written by Steve Blank, which maybe we could put in the show notes, that talks about the history of the Department of Defense and Silicon Valley, and a bunch of other essays as well. But essentially in the 50s and the 60s, there was huge interconnections there. Again, the semiconductor industry itself, which was as a their primary customer was the defense industrial base. And it was only in the 70s and the 80s that those things started to diverge, at least from my understanding.
Talk to me about the capital incentives in this space on the private sector side. For the past 20 to 30 years, the marginal dollar being invested from Wall Street has gone to chase either like quant style micro trading or monetizing the attention of your 7-year-old on social media. And there has been consequently a deprioritization of hard tech and some of these harder problems. Are those incentives, those pressures, something that is on the mind of policymakers in this field? And is there anything that can be done to rectify it?
Yeah. So I ended up taking over this policy area at the White House. We called it supply chain. And I think this is a huge national security concern. It still is. Frankly, the Biden team could be doing much worse.
Yeah.
In what they're like, I'm
Catherine Tai is fine.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
The concern for me is essentially as you've framed it, which is that with that information transition that has been happening for 40 years, there was a lot of money to be made in financialization of vast swaths of our economy. And when you abstract away the factory and you just say, I don't need the factory, I'm looking at a balance sheet, I'm looking at forward cost projections, I'm looking at this, I'm looking at that. And then you say, okay, let's just find the most cost competitive place to build X, Y, or Z. All of a sudden, the fact that you have a factory in Gary, Indiana, or where I'm from, Detroit, Michigan, becomes not as material to the balance sheet of that corporation. And so I think what happened is that especially the Chinese Communist Party has taken advantage of this, and they understand that this is a very long game that needs to be played. And frankly, they did a very good job of extracting a lot of the industrial processes and functions of our industrial economy into theirs. And so we did a great deal of work in trying to think through and then execute how we would re-incentivize. A lot of that was President Trump's tariffs, but then a lot of it was other policies that we started to put in place. How do we re-incentivize the return of that industrial infrastructure to the United States?
And what is innovation, in the defense tech space in particular, look like, being that you can't do that, that you can't outsource it?
Yeah. There's a lot that can be done just with that information transition trend that I identified. And it's interesting because it goes to this question of speed. I don't want to talk my book here, but there is a company that I've invested in, and I won't even talk about what the company specifically does, but I'll just use it as a general example. They make critical parts of things that are used in a wide range of technologies. I'm not even talking about the company's name or what industry it operates in. So at the abstract level, big company has to buy a critical part, and they say, let's go make this part and order it. And then it'll get manufactured and shipped and installed. The make this part and order it was traditionally done nearly by hand. Like, I'm going to draft up drawings for the item that we need to make. Maybe now it's done on a computer. I'm going to make what are called CAD drawings on a computer. What next? I'm going to email them to someone. That person's then going to have to translate those drawings into some type of telemetry that then gets translated to a machine that then gets, starts milling a piece, or, it doesn't have to be a 3D, or it doesn't have to be a CNC machine, but it could be any aspect of the manufacturing process. And if you actually pick apart each one of those phases of a contract, what you'll actually see is that, sure, the manufacturing of something takes a long time, but up front, the design, negotiation, all these other things take just as much time. And so there are plenty of companies out here that are essentially following this format that I'm articulating to you. And actually, there's two in very different areas that I've invested in that I'm talking about here. But so if you admit that you can't actually change the way in which you manufacture these things, what you realize is what you can do is you can radically shorten the design and contractual negotiation timescales. And you can do that using internet-based technologies like Figma, if you've used this, right? So think like Figma for making X. If you do that, you can cut these timelines from months to weeks. And, any astute financial engineer will tell you that velocity of money is really important. So if you shorten your buying cycle from like a year to like 4 months, from like I've ordered it to it's delivered, like you can actually see some pretty interesting financial returns.
Yeah.
So this
profit cycle compounds. It lets you do more with more.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
So how do you extrapolate this to the rest of the economy, like outside of, our defense base?
Oh, I think it absolutely will be. So, I invested in another company that's doing this in the food sector, where they're doing the exact same thing. They're decreasing cycle times, and it changes the unit economics. Again, I don't want to talk my book, so I won't talk specifically where it's in, but so I've invested in two companies that are doing this in the defense space, and I've invested in one company that's doing it in the food and beverage space. And again, at the very abstract level, there's a bunch of opportunities here.
Mm-hmm.
Are you worried about grift? One of your friends, Jay Malik, tweeted a couple months ago, and it's stuck with me ever since. The kind of person he takes least seriously in the world is someone who, year and a half ago, was a Web3 investor, and today is a defense industrial base investor. And, day after today, he's probably an AI investor. And, so is there a funny money chasing the trends, mimetic quality to some of the renewed attention that's coming to this issue that on first blush I'm really excited about, but on second blush I'm like, I don't know if it's you guys that should be doing this?
Yeah. I've been doing this stuff now for 10 years. And
you remember getting laughed out of rooms when you said this was important?
I remember getting laughed out of rooms. Yeah. And not only that, but I remember meeting some of these folks. They don't remember meeting me. And so, it's very interesting. Not only that, but it's there are maybe a handful of people that I know that have been doing this as long as me in this generation. There are other generations, previous generations, that have also done very similar things. There's a great book that Mark Andreessen has recommended at least once on a podcast that I heard him on. Elting Morrison. The book's called Men, Machine, and Modern Times. And it is an amazing set of vignettes about defense innovation at the midpoint in the century and maybe before. Great book. And it's funny because listen to Andreessen give an interview where he recommends this book. I went out and read it, And it was like, I've been in this room getting yelled at by like the chief gunner in the Navy about the way in which we, do naval gunnery. And so, very little of what me and my friends had been doing, before it was cool, surprised me when I read about these previous eras. And look, that's a sign of some amount of success, right? Like the Defense Innovation Unit, there are plenty of people that claim that they helped create it. I obviously wasn't the sole person that did it, but like, good on them. I'm glad that there's 20 people out there saying that they did it. I'm glad that, people sort of come around. I'm glad that, even people like Elizabeth Warren are talking about this stuff on the Hill. It's a sign of success.
Yeah.
I think that my biggest concern, and I had this at every phase, when we had this 10-person task of heretics working for the senior officer in the Navy, the chief of naval operations, everyone wanted to come work for us. Like all the other active duty, Navy officers and enlisted wanted to come join this little task force. And the thing that we always tried to select against was actually empathy. Because there are plenty of people out there that want to come and join up with the new hot thing. And they're like, yeah, AI is the thing. Like, this is the thing, et cetera, defense tech, A&D, whatever you want to call it. But very few people are willing, and it takes a while, right, to deeply understand the problems, to understand who faces them, and then try and go out and solve them. And when we were working on this task force, I would sit people down and I would say something very offensive to most modern ears, which is, how are you going to help me kill the enemy faster? And people would be like, well, no, I wanted to join the Innovation Council. I'd be like, no, our job is to literally go out and murder the enemy.
Yeah.
And like, you're going to help me do it better if you get across this line. So like, what's your plan?
Yeah.
Because the whole point is like, and I'd been to some extent one of these people like out there, and like, I didn't want fancier toys because I like toys. I wanted fancier toys because they would have helped us go find people better. Like out manhunting against, foreign commandos or whatever as we were doing. And it's like, I wanted data science to find these people. And instead I had groups of people, crunching numbers for hours a day. And it was like a waste, it wasn't a waste of time because we succeeded, but it was like, you want someone that has empathy for the customer. Startup people are very good about this. Mm-hmm. And this is one of the reasons why I love reading people like Paul Graham, who's the founder of Y Combinator. He has this seminal essay called Do Things That Don't Scale. And it talks about essentially having empathy for your customer. You must go out and understand. So with all of this fancy stuff and everyone's like, yeah, national security technology and this and that and whatever. And it comes down to, and I certainly stand in judgment of nearly everyone that I meet. So, but I hope people judge themselves as much as anyone can judge them. The point is like, you have to judge whether or not you're having empathy for the people that you will eventually support, right? So all these folks, why some of it rings hollow is like, I'm not sure they understand the challenges that they're trying to overcome. I hope they do. Genuinely, I hope they do. But it's like, until you've been to these factories or used the equipment or done this or done that or talked with, you could just go down this list. It's like, I'm just not sure that they're here to actually do the thing that like desperately needs to be done. Desperately needs to be done. And so then the question is, if they don't have that empathy, which you can only build through some measure of experience, it doesn't have to be military, it doesn't even have to be civilian. Like there are plenty of folks out there that just dig into some of these problems and like, wow, this is super f***ed up. Like it takes this, like Palmer Luckey, like the kid did like the headset thing or whatever, but he's a product guy and he understands like, wow, it's kind of screwed up that like it takes 7 years to take someone's idea and then get it into the hands of soldiers. Like, what if we brought the SaaS model, software as a service model, to the military and charge them for sort of like outcomes like, and then just built cool stuff in order to achieve those outcomes. Like that is empathy right there. And there's tons of other empathy with like other companies as well. But the point is, yeah, that's my sort of skepticism as I meet all of my new friends. I love them all. But like, that's my judgment, which is that like, do I think this person actually has empathy for the customer? And, that, you know, that's the thing that I think needs to happen.